Welcome to GizmoSapiens Show 282. This is Chris, and with me today is,
I am Matt.
and we're calling this one Working for a Living. So, work isn't what it used to be, and neither are the workers. In this episode, Matt and I are going to dig into what's reshaping the modern workplace, fresh data that's finally pushing back on age bias at work, a new report on why your Windows laptop might be failing you more than your Mac ever would, the rise of a scrappy new middle class of content creators quietly cashing out to the 9 to 5, and mounting evidence that return to office mandates are torching the employee trust from the inside out. Let's find out what's going on and how you work in 2026. So, first topic, let's talk about age bias again. We've talked about this in the past. Uh, it's kind of funny because you and I are in that age area where, um, and it's funny, but there's been a lot of research that's come out recently about age bias. And I mean, it's not like this is something that hasn't been going on for a long time. My dad 20, 30 years ago talked about creating a company. Uh, his name was Jerry. He was going to call it geriatric engineering. Uh, and just be a consulting company, and everybody would be, it would be reverse age bias. In this case, everybody would be experienced in their 40s and 50s and 60s, so that they could share their experience in the workplace because there's definitely a lack of that. So, and it's really kind of strange. A lot of companies, with as many layoffs, particularly in tech this year, overwhelmingly, people are losing their continuity, their corporate knowledge, the experience, uh, because they're laying off. The penny pinchers are laying off the people who are drawing more salary, thinking that, hey, we can just replace them with people new into the workforce, and we're going to get all the productivity we were getting out of the people with all the experience and knowledge. And research has countered that, saying that there's a 2025 Intelligence Journal study of 16 cognitive, emotional, and personality dimensions found that while raw processing speed declines after early adulthood, distraction resistance and accumulated knowledge keep improving, with the overall peak functioning of workers landing between ages 55 and 60. Um, and then there was an AARP OECD research study that there's a 10-point increase in the share of workers over 50 correlates with 1.1% higher productivity.
So here's the problem. The problem is that as workers get more experience and provide more value to the company, they cost the company more.
Yes.
And so the bean counters think that we can get that same production at a reduced cost by laying off the guy that got us here and hiring some kid that doesn't know anything but what he learned in college, which I think we've had this conversation about how useless college is too.
Yes.
Yet the bean counters don't take that
Well,
into account.
the funny thing is there are certain things that you learn in education. It doesn't mean you had to learn it in college, but you learn in education that don't change. Math does not change. 1 plus 1 is always going to equal 2. And if you want to argue with me about that, come prove it to me, and I'll fight you. as my 24-year-old engineer daughter would tell you. But the you know there's a lot of soft skills that are required in any job that young kids don't have the experience to have developed. And it's kind of funny because that's one of the eh, I work for a technical company. We're all, we're an IT integrator, and we consult for federal government agencies, but everybody in my company came from a music background. Our CEO was an MVS programmer, but the reality of it was is she was a opera singer in New York, an actual a successful opera singer. Um, our VP of sales and operations has had 40 years in the tech industry, but he's also a singer songwriter in Nashville. I've got uh, a music background. You've got a music background. Um, and my boss and I, the VP of sales and operations, we go back and forth because his son is also a music major. My son has a degree in art. Um, and he argues that the thing about the music is that uh we learned a lot of soft skills that have become invaluable in our business. They're in some ways they're almost, well, I won't even say they're almost, in a lot of ways they are as important as the hard technical skills that we also have.
Oh, absolutely. Particularly in a smaller company space than say a big large corporate environment. I'm not advocating for don't hire new kids
No,
because
no,
those new
no.
kids are going to need
Well,
that experience
again,
to replace us when we
the
decide to
research,
retire.
like Boston Consulting Group has a study out in 2022, and it says cross-generational teams outperform homogenous ones.
Hmm.
you know um in uh the UK, a retailer, they use this as an example. uh they had an age diverse uh group who ran this UK retailer, and they saw profits jump 18% over competitors who did not have an age diverse group, who were either all stodgy old men and women, or young bucks who didn't know anything. And part of the thing, it goes back to, so my I will use my youngest daughter as a good example. uh she's at a company now where uh, and she's only a couple years out of college as an engineer, where she's been given the opportunity to develop a program herself, because she's the only engineer on the logistics side, or industrial systems engineer on the logistics side of a manufacturing corporation. Prior to this, she worked in the automotive industry as uh, as an ISE. And the funny thing is this company had no continuity of leadership when somebody, because all the only way to get promoted within the company uh was to leave the company,
Yeah.
to get either, because again, the same thing. Oh, we can replace you, you're not. And that company, the which was part of GM, as or formerly part of GM, as they diversified and started selling things off because they weren't profitable, is still being run by stodgy old men up at the top, and workers who don't have any continuity. And like when she left detailed instructions for her, the person who they would hire coming in after her. But that is usually not the case. These young kids, they don't have the experience to do so. And she was only doing it because she knew she was going to feel sorry for whoever they hired and brought in after her, because there were no managers. Well, like, she was there for 18 months, and there's a reason you're only there for 18 months. It's because there was nobody there to mentor her, to tell her how the company operated, how they did things and everything else. And they burn these young kids out quickly. And so what do? They go, well, this isn't worth the money to do it, I'm going to leave because it's stressful. And in her case, it was unreasonable amount of travel for a young worker, you know, to go to do stuff that was obviously, in some respects, it reminded me of going to a lot of government meetings, which I have to attend. And where you have meetings that are kind of meaningless, meetings that should have been a one-liner email, but now we're having a Zoom meeting or a Teams meeting, or we're going to one of the manufacturing facilities in another country for 2 weeks, when in reality, nobody planned out that, you know, there's only a day of work for 2 weeks, for sending people for 2 weeks. These companies aren't going to stay in business with that operational model, and part of that problem is because there's no young blood at the top and there's no old blood at the bottom. So there's no intermingling to make things fresher, because you know uh, I guess in some respects I have a young mindset, but I also am very entrepreneurial. That's why I work for a small integrator after spending 13 years at a corporate company, um, at a big tech company. And so I understand the idea of being young and wanting to come in and burn things down because you have good ideas and you see, particularly when you're first at a company, it's easy to see where there are inefficiencies in either process or company culture or whatever, and they need to be addressed so that you can, and that means change. The problem with doing that at a big tech company that already has, and in my case, I wasn't working for like, a Google who had only, been around for a while. I was working for a company who had started out in the mainframe industry. And that's like, you know, one person being the rudder steering the Titanic, you
Yeah.
know. I'm not going to stop them from hitting the iceberg,
Mm.
you know. And and again, there's things that fall into place when you're making good money. You can forgive. Yeah, I've always said, I've told my kids this, and I've told other, I have adopted kids. You can't see the air quotes. Uh, and other kids that I have mentored over time, and I've always told them, I said, the amount of bullshit you're willing to put up with is directly proportional to the amount of compensation you're receiving.
Right.
And if you're being compensated well, you kind of forgive a lot of the bullshit because it's like, well, whatever. I just ignore it. Is as long as I'm making my money,
Yeah.
or I have the opportunity to make my money.
Right.
You know, um,
Or you essentially quiet quit.
yeah, yeah, exactly. You're there. I
Yeah.
mean, that's the whole government bureaucratic process right there. A lot of which that's a whole nother discussion. We'll probably have in another
Mm.
podcast here. But they, yeah, that whole issue, they, particularly if you work for a company from, you invest 10 years into a company and they make the same mistakes over and over again, and you show them how to get around that, or you help identify it and then identify solutions, and nobody's willing to take the risk, or they don't want to do it because it wasn't their idea.
That last one is the one that infuriates me the most.
Yes. Yeah. I'm absolutely not gonna, so that's part of the reason I left my previous company, um, is because uh, the CEO and uh, I was there 3 years before the CEO. That CEO at that time was there, and that CEO and I didn't agree because he didn't, you know, he was only he would stubbornly refuse if you brought a good idea up to do it, even if you couched it in such a way that you even tried to make it look like his idea. It was no, complete resistance. After I left, he was gone in 2 months. You know,
I mean, that's how many times have we heard that story
yeah,
or stories like it?
yep,
You're either innovating or you're dying.
yeah.
I mean,
Well, and it's kind of funny. So the question you have to ask is, there's all kinds of data saying that you need to keep these people. Now, I totally understand if you have people who, because the unfortunate thing is, and I talk about this in the industry. I learned this from a colleague early on, is that in all of these industries there are what we call retreads. You know, particularly if you're working with the federal government, the pool of candidates who are willing to put up with that bullshit are much smaller than the pool of candidates who are work in the commercial space. And so you get a lot of retreads. And I've seen this happen over and over again, particularly with startup companies, is you have a company, they create a product, they truly innovate and they create something amazing. And the company in its early stages when it's first starting to sell to customers and everything is super nimble, not because they have fewer people, but they're nimble because they don't have all of these processes and things put into place. And then somebody at the top or the investors decide that, hey, we want to take this company public. And so then they start hiring the retreads, the people who come in and put bureaucratic processes in place and um, and essentially stagnate the company. They make it so hard to do business that the company essentially stagnates. And so I'm working with one company right now who's in this place. They're trying to go IPO, and they've brought in a whole bunch of retreads. I mean, people I've known in the industry who were in the industry 20 years before I was there, and they weren't great workers in the first place. They were just people who knew how to follow process and all this. And you just watch the company as as they've brought more and more of these people in. And the whole idea is that, well, we have governance now because we're trying to IPO, so we have to show that we're doing this and we have to do better reporting. And I'm like, but that's not bringing in retreads. That's the discipline to just do it, keep good records.
Yeah,
And and
which they should be doing anyway.
correct. Correct. And and so what happens is that these people come in, they stall innovation. So now this company it's a great company and they have an amazing product. And from an engineering point of view, they're still doing great things, but they're these new people coming in to, so that they can IPO and all this stuff are pulling the life out of the company. The salespeople and the technical salespeople are all going, when are we going to IPO? Because once they IPO, they're going to cash out and leave the company. It's not worth it's that bad, and it's that bad that there have been a lot of people who are like, yeah, I'm not waiting for the IPO. And when you ask about or even they ask about the IPO, they go, they get the corporate response, it'll be the next 18 to 24 months. Well, they got that response 18 to 24 months ago. you know, why is it not happening? Well, because the company stagnated. Why is the company stagnated? Well, because the company stagnated in sales because um, we hired all of these back end people who are not customer facing, and they've put in all these policies and procedures to make it hard to sell. They make pricing changes because they think they need to, the value is of the product needs to be higher. Um, and there's also there's something that I also find strange working in the tech industry on both the sales and the technical side over the last 25-30 years of my career. And that is, um, there's this idea that we must artificially set our prices high because we can always go down, but we can't always go up. And that is not true. I mean, that's certainly not true in 2026. Look at what Ramageddon has done. I can tell you, yes, the cost of goods to manufacture things that require RAM and flash memory and everything have gone up because this is simple Keynesian economics, supply and demand. We can only build so much, and the demand for it is greater than what we can build. So that means that the value of what can be built is greater because there's no surplus driving down the cost of the product. Now, is everybody in that chain from Micron and SK Hynix and Samsung and those guys who are manufacturing the memory all the way up to the companies not taking advantage of that to up their prices greater than the cost of goods going up? Absolutely. That's why we're seeing month over month a 20% increase in the cost of goods. And you get a quote for something and it's not good for more than 14 days.
The other side of that is
And don't get me wrong, why are companies in business?
exactly.
They're in business to make money. Everybody forgets that, and everybody likes to, particularly a lot of my customer sets. You would think that the United States, the greatest capitalist country in the world, their government would understand that there is no altruism in capitalism in the sense of why are we in business to do this, you know? And so they think that all the vendors are greedy and all this stuff, and it's like, well, wait a
Well,
minute,
and they are.
but
That's
that's
their job.
job, yeah,
The guy that has to figure out that his supply chain is too long and has to figure out how to take a link or two out
yeah,
by either cutting quality or finding a way to manufacture the missing link
yeah,
on their own. That's the only two ways to do that.
yeah. Well, and right, I mean, we'll talk about this, I'm sure, in a future episode, but you know, part of the issue, and this goes right back to the whole workforce thing, why we're seeing, lots of people being dumped, particularly out of the tech industry, but it's not just the tech
Oh, it
industry. It's pervasive. Um, out of industry is because we moved manufacturing out of the United States, and so our supply chain got longer, and we also made ourselves dependent on manufacturers who, although we might develop the product, they're manufacturing it for us, and so when
and they're making their own decisions.
correct. It's also, I mean, there's so much to that to unpack that
Yeah.
people don't understand, and why it's important to get manufacturing back to the United States. I don't, and frankly, it is not about jobs. It has nothing to do about, well, it's not about unskilled labor workforce jobs, which a lot of people assume that bringing manufacturing is back. No, manufacturing's moved on. Manufacturing should be automated at this point as much as possible. So the jobs we need to develop here and bring back are really technicians and technical engineers who maintain and can program our automated manufacturing capabilities. Um, but the thing is part of the problem with IP theft that we're suffering in the United States, which again directly affects part of the issues why we're having people having to be laid off or losing their job in the technical fields, is because we're letting a country who has, culturally, they don't really respect intellectual property.
No, not at all.
Yeah,
I mean, I think they would laugh at that idea.
yeah. Let's move on.
Indeed.
So, going back to a more technical thing, so Omniscient Digital Workplace did a report uh, in the enterprise space, and they talked about Windows versus Macintosh reliability and reality. And what they found is that they pulled telemetry from its managed enterprise devices and the size of hardware performance reliability across their customers. They found that from an update speed, Mac OS devices patch 1.5 times faster than Windows machines, which I attest to. They patch all the patches from Patch Tuesday this week. I had to apply to all my Windows machines, both corporately and personally, and they took for frickin' ever. I actually thought some of the machines were totally hung. That's how long it took. It took hours for one of our corporate notebooks to update. And because I run corporate IT, I know what all the group policies and things are on there, and we're not putting like an overly huge burden on these devices. And it took hours to update like 6 patches. Um, the Windows machine iOS updates 8.1 times faster than Android, which I thought that was an interesting statistic. Critical industries like healthcare, pharma, and retail lag noticeably on OS patching despite handling sensitive data. That was another thing that I thought was an interesting statistics. They talked about device longevity, 90% of Windows PCs are under 3 years old, and only 2% make it to 6 years. On the Mac side, 65% are under 3 years old, but 11.5% are still in service after 6 years. On reliability side, Windows users see 3.1 times more forced shutdowns, 2.2 times more app crashes, and 7.5 times more app hangs than Mac users in the corporate network. That actually, those statistics are actually really important because that talks directly to productivity. Um, and you can argue all you want about, my machine at home runs perfectly and this and that and the other thing. Uh, but you're not doing the same things that you're required to do for work
Right.
on your home machine. And frankly, do you even notice when some things crash? Or are you even running, the suite of tools that might be more prone to crash because Windows keeps changing something on the back end uh, constantly? That's my biggest complaint, particularly in the corporate environment. Um,
Well, this goes back to we've allowed Microsoft to control the hardware.
yeah,
You know, international business machines built business machines.
correct.
They didn't get into the home PC market. Well, they pretty much got in it and sold it to Lenovo.
Whoa, yeah, exactly.
You know, and, but that's my point.
Yeah.
We're allowing Microsoft to make those decisions now, and that's
Well, I've said this for a long time because I've always worked in enterprise IT and data centers and all of this. And um, back when I started, Windows took over for both mainframe. Windows NT took over for mainframe and Novell NetWare. And I won't say Novell was a pain in the butt. It had issues all the time, particularly on the client side. I'm not so much. The thing about it though is I'm not so much sure that it wasn't more because Windows, particularly back then, just sucked. I mean, I will say this. I look back on Windows reliability and I look at it today, it is 1,000 times better than it was. I've forgotten, you forget as it gets better how bad it used to be, particularly in the Windows 3.1 and Windows 95, 98 days, machines would crash constantly. It
yeah.
was no wonder. And it was even worse in corporate environments because, um, particularly like I worked for a general at the time. I worked for the head shed. So there were multiple generals, but the deputy commander, he was a former pilot in the Air Force, and he thought when he wrote an email that that computer should operate like the HUD of his aircraft. And I had to explain to him one day that Microsoft does not build aircraft interfaces for a reason,
Yeah.
you know, and because he was prone to writing novels as emails. And we were on Novell NetWare, and it wasn't Novell that crashed, it was Windows that crashed. But it Novell NetWare at the time and their email group wise did not have a way to recover an in-process email. And he was like, bring it back. I'm like, I can't bring it back, it doesn't exist, it went into the ether. And um, and we don't seem to have those types of problems today. But the app crashing, and it used to be, Lord, if you had a driver mismatch and blue screen of death was terrible. It would happen all the time. And that was a real, because those machines, particularly a lot of early Windows NT machines, um, and then Windows XP 2 generations later, um, corporate machines at the time were the minimum specs, and so it would take them forever to reboot. I remember people would turn their machines off at night because, we're saving energy, because people got concerned about energy costs. So don't leave your computer on overnight. And frankly, we had a network policy that would shut everything down, you know. Um, and people would come in the morning and turn their machines on, and then they would go get a pastry and a cup of coffee, and 15 minutes later their machine, after all the login scripts and everything and group policy objects had been applied, it would boot, and you'd have a desktop you could log into, and we don't quite have that problem today, but um it is something you can measure in productivity in the matter of minutes, and the reliability even of Windows has gotten better to the point where there is an expectation that uh, if you're issued a laptop by any company, that you can work when I need you to, you know.
Yeah.
And what the other thing that's interesting too, um, is because of Windows 10, going back to your whole Microsoft thing,
Mm-hmm.
VDI or virtual desktop infrastructure, where you don't you're basically, you have a dumb terminal and you're logging into a remote desktop or remote computer, has increased 36% year over year. And a lot of that has been tied directly to uh, Windows 10 being or end of life. But in addition to this, on July 6th weekend, so we've been seeing a couple things about Linux desktop use, which I think we've seen spikes in Linux desktop use, particularly since the end of Windows 10. We're seeing it I'm seeing it more frequently as a third option in enterprise environments. Like one of my federal customers, I was there last week, and the guy had requested a developer had requested a new laptop, and he was while he was waiting for it, but it was a Linux-based machine. Um, so we're now starting to see, yes, he's a developer, but we're starting to see Linux-based machines become the norm. Uh, in that, you know, in some of these environments. But in this case, it was in their standard. You could order, it didn't matter who you were. He just happened to be a developer. It's like, hey, I want a Linux machine. And because they have the choice between Windows, Mac, and Linux. And years ago, I had one specific customer who was in a high performance computing customer who all of their desktops were Linux at the time. And this is years ago, like 15 years ago, so it wasn't like it was, you know, the heyday. Now, these guys were all adminning high performance computers that all ran Linux. So it made sense for them, but they weren't having any issues even then, with Office documents or email. Um, and in their environment, the back end Microsoft services were the default. So they were, they were. It didn't stop them from being able to interact from those common services. Uh, but and after there was a report by one group who was suspect, saying that in the United States that desktop Linux market share had reached 10%, which is significant. Um, it was still quite a ways behind Apple, and then even more ways longer ways behind Windows, but it was still significantly. But the people who had reported that, the way they collected their metrics was considered unreliable. But Cloudflare, after the July 4th weekend, when people started back to work on on July 6th reported that there was a 22% increase in Linux desktop usage. Um, and they attributed about 9% of that actually to actual desktop users based upon the activity that they were doing. And then um, another large percentage of it was based on agentic AI. So people running agents on their Linux desktops. Um, but that 9% pushed the desktop Linux usage numbers to actually about 12%. And Cloudflare's data is, while not completely undisputable, is a lot more accurate than the previous people. I forget who they were because it was they're statistically insignificant in who they are and how they did their metrics. But that's going to change things too, and we're starting to see that change wholesale. And I think part of that is because people are getting tired of the Microsoft stack. Either from a cost perspective, um, either from and don't get me wrong, I, there are some things that I think Microsoft has done very well. There are some things that I think they're ruining. Uh, I always thought Microsoft Office was one of the good things that Microsoft had actually produced. And I don't actually run Microsoft Office on any of my machines anymore, including my Windows machines, because particularly Outlook, they've encrapified it so bad that it's useless to me. And so I found alternatives for all those products, and they're getting too expensive. Office 365 makes sense if you're a small business for hosting your email and stuff like that, but it doesn't make a whole lot of sense when uh, you start to scale that out, and corporations are starting to see that. And Microsoft's steadily become a bigger and bigger services provider as opposed to a technology company.
Correct. And I think that is kind of a natural evolution because, again, IBM started out as a technology company. They became
A
a financial
services
services
company.
company.
Yeah.
And once you lose sight of what it is that you got into business for,
Yeah.
not that I'm opposed to diversification, but if you're spinning plates, you can't let one fall.
Yeah. Absolutely. Absolutely. Well, let's move on. Let's talk about there's a growing wave of workers leaving traditional jobs. I don't think it's that they're leaving traditional jobs. I think a lot of these people have had to transition from being laid off from
Hmm.
traditional jobs into content creation, and creating, they're hustling,
Yeah,
you
and,
know?
and and honestly, this is a decision that people have had to make forever. You spend time with a company and they, for whatever reason, decide to lay you off. You take a look at the landscape. Well, do I get another Joe job somewhere else, or do I engage in some entrepreneurship
Ship. Yeah.
and do something where I control my own destiny?
Yep.
And I think more and more people are choosing that route.
Yeah. Well, and it's kind of funny because, uh, while profiting from YouTube and X uh, as platforms is, m- this is anecdotal information, but I've heard from some content creators, long-term content creators, that it's now taking either twice as many subscribers or twice as many views per video to make the same amount of money that they were making, 2 years ago.
Well, sure, as
But
the
that's
supply
because the supply
increases,
has increased.
the demand will
But um
diminish.
it also it as supply increases in the case of like YouTube, um they can't afford to pay everybody the same if you have if you're you know this you're doubling the amount of content creators creating content because it may not it's not leading to YouTube or X getting double the amount of viewers, which then they if people were really savvy and thought about the business models, and maybe that's just the nature of where I am in the industry. You see the business model and what,
Yeah.
yeah, it's the product is technical, but the business model, the way they're making money, they're a marketing company.
Yeah.
They're selling advertising space. They're just like television stations.
Yep.
Um, and if uh they're not making double the advertising money, they can't afford to pay people the same amount output.
Plus, how many people, how much of that market is consumed by YouTube Premium?
Correct.
People who are saying, I don't want
What?
ads.
Yes. Yeah.
And are they making that up with subscriptions enough to maintain the model?
Yeah.
And I don't think they are.
Well, the other thing is there are competitors uh, to YouTube out there. Now, they have most of the competitor where YouTube is more like a cable company, in my opinion. You can go search and find content on anything you like. Um, and YouTube, one of the things, their biggest cost has to be infrastructure to support that because it doesn't cost you anything to upload a video to YouTube. Counts are free. You can upload content all you want, short videos, long form videos. Uh, it's really up to you to develop it, and and there's people I have YouTube Premium, um, family, so I even pay a little bit more.
Yeah.
But that's because we watch a ton of YouTube, and there are content creators on there that I love to watch, and I watch every week and everything. And I remember watching them years ago when they weren't big YouTubers. And it's one of those things where your production has values have gone up and they've gotten comfortable. It's just like if you listen to the first GizmoSapiens podcast versus today, we didn't, it was stilted and compared to today.
Right.
Um and that's the way their videos were. So, there's this whole idea of where if you're a long-term viewer of somebody and they're still producing good content or better content, it's like you've grown with them. Whereas in TV, everything is so polished. Even it might be bad, but it's polished, because they can throw, you know, $1 million at an episode or a couple $100,000 at an episode. Uh, but at the end of the day, there's not this like you've watched from the beginning on some of these YouTubers. And that's where a lot of these content creators are. But what's really interesting, it, this is almost moving towards the old music model where these people they're not making money on views, they're making money on brand sponsorships. You might get 10,000 followers or a couple thousand followers who are really into whatever you're willing to talk about. And so brands are going, I can give you $1,000 a month if you will advertise for me in your show. And even long established YouTubers are getting that. Yeah, and that's actually how they're making the majority of their money as the YouTube payouts have dropped. I mean, there's not a video out there that somebody hasn't watched where you learn about Raycon headphones. I'm never going to buy a pair of Raycons, but I know what they are. And some of these health and beauty brands have found local influencers in markets like Minneapolis and Cincinnati and Detroit, and they have a couple thousand subscribers who watch, where a couple hundred people watch them routinely, and they talk about Maybelline or whatever, and they're making money on decent money on these things through advertising and affiliate links and Amazon storefronts. And I mean, it's kind of interesting. And these people are not looking to become like big celebrities. They're just looking to be, do what they do, and they kind of become local celebrities. Uh, so the influencer marketing economy hit 33 billion in 2025. That's up 1.7 billion from just 1.7 billion in 2015. So in a 10-year period, we took that market, which was 1.7 billion, and it's now moved to 33 billion. Um, what was really interesting is 60% of Gen Z survey respondents said they would become an influencer if given a chance.
Well, that doesn't surprise me because
Me neither, because that's where the majority of them are. That's where they're getting their entertainment
yeah.
is from YouTube and TikTok and um
Plus, their whole lives have been digitized.
yes. So and as part of the case study in this, one influencer, local influencer, she's 25 years old. She's garnered 25,000 followers, which is not a whole lot. She landed $25,000 in brand deals last year and expects to make 50,000 this year. Her first deal came when she only had 8,000 followers. So it's not like, these deals to make money are based upon you got to have a million followers or, you know, 100,000 followers. It's they're the marketing is becoming more focused. They're taking these massive marketing budgets and going, how do we reach more people in a more focused manner? Whereas TV, you put an
They're
ad on
shotgunning it.
television, you're
Yeah.
shotgunning it.
Yeah.
Even on YouTube, where they look at the algorithm and go, "Oh, you're watching these kind of things, so we're going to feed you ads that are for this." But at the end of the day, YouTube's got to make money. So if they run out of that ad, they either or run out of advertisers who fit your algorithmic profile, they either shotgun you the same ad over and over and over. That's part of the reason that drove me to pay for premium. Um, or you start getting fed ads that you have no interest in because they're trying to get the ad impressions so that they make money. Now, uh, and so brands are leading to micro influencers. They average 3.2% engagement versus just 1.1% with for mega influencers. That's a huge delta.
Say
So,
that again?
so these micro influencers are averaging a 3.2% engagement versus the 1.1% for mega influencers. So like big stars,
Yeah.
that's 2.1% delta, which means that you're converting out of your viewers, you're getting more out of your subscribers, you're getting more viewers, which means
Yeah.
that's more impressions
Yep.
than somebody who has a million or 2 million subscribers uh, are going to get. In a percentage. Now, 1.1. If you have 10 million subscribers, you're getting 1.1%. That still means you're getting a hundred thousand views or something. But still, um, they're saying that a creator with 50,000 followers can command roughly $3,500 per post. Now, that being said, the catch is that 50% of full time creators earn below a living wage. Uh, Income is wildly inconsistent month to month, and there's no safety net, no healthcare, no job security, no. But you know what? I, the
You take a part-time job to get that.
exactly, exactly, and I also when you're an entrepreneur, most people who are entrepreneurs don't get that either. You
Yeah.
start a tech company, you start a marketing company, you're a lawyer, you don't have, a health plan and all this other stuff right away. There are people. One of the groups that's an emerging technology group that I've been following, um, just because uh, they've had such an interesting use case for AI is the legal tech community. And it's greater than AI what they're doing, and they've been around for a while. But the legal community is one of the first places where they're ditching paper and it's all becoming digital. And how do you manage that? And what are the workflows, and what are the products that can help you build those workflows, and how do you guarantee that signatures are valid, and how do you guarantee that documents are not being changed, and all of this, and how is the government changed to support filings that are all digital versus paperwork filings and all this other stuff. And it's a fascinating process because I would say while they're 10 years ahead in adoption on certain pieces, the whole industry is 10 years behind in other parts, and watching that dichotomy and clash from a technological standpoint. So I don't know. I've been doing that. I've been doing this podcast for a long time at this point. I think since 2009. um, I've never done this because I was trying to make money.
Yeah.
This is more of a catharsis for me. It's a way to talk about some things that I want to talk about. It also is practice for being in front of customers where I have to speak all the time. And it also helps me think through things. Now, we have subscribers to the podcast, and I appreciate all of them. We have subscribers to our YouTube channel, which is mostly just a video of our audio podcasts. Although we're going to change a little bit of that up here in the future with some actual videos on some things we want to cover. But I'm not looking to get brand deals. As a matter of fact, I would shy. I I particularly on technology stuff. I would not want to be beholden to anybody to say their product is great.
Yeah.
You know, Raycon, I would probably tell you no. You'd have to offer some real money, and then even then, I would just talk about your product. I would never say that I use your product because it would be very unlikely that I would. But I like to be able to talk, and some of the people I follow on YouTube, they will say, "Yeah, I got this from the company, but this is my review," and to have to justify that every time that
Yeah.
they get on, or they have to mark it sponsored because somebody provided them equipment, and then have to give the disclaimer that no, this is my actual review. They don't get to any say in what I have to say, and they don't get to see it before I publish, that kind of thing. Uh, I like the freedom to just talk about what I want to talk about. So I don't know. Eh,
Well, I mean, none of this surprises me.
no,
I mean, when I was a blogger, the monetization piece comes with its own.
gotchas.
Yeah,
Yep.
it really
There's
does.
always a quid pro quo.
It
If
really
we
is.
if we give you money, you can't say this, or you have to endorse this, or
Which is, like you said,
yeah,
I always had to say, particularly in the space that I was operating in, just because you're advertising on my site doesn't mean you can't screw up and I won't say anything about
got
it.
it. Yeah, exactly.
Because I guarantee you, your $10 ain't gonna s- skew my point of view.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly.
And
So
if you're okay with that, that's on you. And I frequently, it got to the point that I literally put it at the top of the site. Like, just because they are advertising here
doesn't
doesn't.
mean we agree with everything they do or say,
Yeah.
or we won't call them out for something we disagree with.
Yeah.
Yeah. So let's move on to the last thing. So return to office. Now, I have not worked in an office on a day-to-day basis since 2003. I don't know that I could go back and work at an office on a day-to-day basis. I mean, I've been working in an office as a roaming employee for the last 3 weeks, uh, with one of my customers, and it's, uh, it's annoying to say the least, you know, and I am neurodivergent, and I have fairly fairly bad case of ADHD. So any particularly in the tech world, office shenanigans happen. People are talking. That just the fact if you hear other people on phones next to you, um, or in Zoom meetings, or I shouldn't say Zoom, I hate Zoom. Teams meetings. I shouldn't say Teams, I hate Teams. WebExes.
I shouldn't say WebEx.
I like WebExes. Uh, but in video meetings and stuff,
Yeah.
even if they have headphones on, so you're not hearing all of it, it's distracting. And kind of going back to the being of a certain age, I have developed uh, coping mechanisms to help concentrate and get things done. But in those environments, it's always much harder to do uh, on a day-to-day basis. That didn't seem to bother me as much when I was younger. Now, part of it too is I haven't. It's been such a long time since I had to be in an office
Yeah.
that it's hard for me to, you know, like if there's distractions or there's noise, it to me it has to be noise that I created. So like if I want to play music in the background, it has to be something that I know that I'm not gonna
Yeah. Get sidetracked
tracked on.
into.
Yeah,
Yeah.
my wife gets sidetracked. She has ADHD too. She gets sidetracked cleaning the house because she's like, I need to have music on and stuff. And she'll spend 15 minutes
Trying
like
to find something.
skipping through music
Yeah.
to find something. And then when a song comes on a playlist that she doesn't like, she spends 15 minutes, so there's all these pauses. And I'm like, I can't do that. I either want it deadly quiet. And it's funny because um, I get on calls like, WebExes and Teams meetings and stuff. And my coworkers don't realize that there's 3 dogs laying around me the entire time,
Yeah.
you know, because my dogs very rarely bark. And if they do bark, it's because they're alerting me to something that they need to alert me to.
Yeah.
And, and it's because I keep this quiet environment that the dogs are not reactive and they're not doing stuff. Whereas my wife likes lots of noise and all this. But the other thing I have is in those environments, what makes it so hard to concentrate and what most people don't realize about a lot of ADHD is it's not that it's the ability to filter noise is
Yeah.
one of the big issues. That's what I have an issue. So like if I'm in a crowded restaurant with customers at lunch, in order for me to pick their voice out of all the noise in the restaurant, I have to
Yeah.
look at them and look at their lips.
And be very focused.
Yes.
I'm the same way.
And in an office environment, and a lot of times, particularly with government customers, they don't have webcams. So you're on a WebEx or a Teams meeting and it's just audio. And if you're hearing all this other noise around you, it is very hard to focus on who's speaking. So I tend to wear over the ear headphones that are noise canceling so that I don't hear the distractions outside. But that in and of itself becomes problematic because then you don't realize it, but you're talking louder
Yeah.
because you're not hearing.
Yeah.
And you can't hear because it's noise canceling, you can't hear your own voice as well. You sound like you feel like you're muffled.
Which I don't care for that.
Yeah.
I mean, even when I was doing internet radio, a lot of those guys would wear headphones when broadcasting, and I just can't do it.
I would always, when I worked in the music studio, we had we had studio monitors, but if you were trying to get a certain sound or you were isolating a track, you would have to use headphones to wear, and I always I would put them over my ears, but I would pull one partially back so this ear was open. I could hear what people were saying in the studio,
Yeah.
and that always helped. But yeah, I didn't like I if it was me when I was in the studio by myself in the engineering room,
Yeah.
and there was nobody else in the studio, I would just turn the studio monitors on and listen to it that way.
Exactly.
Um, but going back to this, so return to office mandates. Um, the thing that's happening with this, and why people are leaving jobs when they shouldn't be, where and companies should be concerned about this, is because
Yes.
the managers and their retread managers
Yeah.
believe that physical presence means commitment and concentration, and that is not the case. As a matter of fact, offices um, and office spaces, particularly the more busy they are with the more noise they have, are much less productive. I mean, hence why executives have closed door offices, and
Yeah.
so your workers who are doing all the other stuff out there, they're being distracted by all the noise and every people walking by and all this other stuff. And it should be have been proven because remember that whole idea in the early 2000s through about 2015 of the open office space
Mhm.
where we're getting rid of cubes and you're just going to sit at like a giant table
Table.
and you're supposed to work. And I know we had that concept at the last big tech company I worked for, and when I had to go into the office, um, they called it touchdown areas and they were open. And it was like you'd go in there and you'd try to work and people would come by and they would stop you, or you're fighting the conversation on the phone next to you at the next station on the touchdown area. And it was super distracting. And I used to, if there was an empty conference room, I would go in the conference room, shut the door, and I would go work in there.
Yeah.
And that wasn't uncommon. It was just, and I used to do it. They'd get mad at me because I would be in the conference room, but I would get there before everybody else too. Like, you know, early bird gets the worm, baby.
Absolutely.
And but this um, back to the office mandates that are happening. There was a survey of 1,000 U.S. workers. 72% suspect RTO mandates are secretly a voluntary attrition strategy, which
I
I
believe that as
totally
well.
believe that is true.
Yeah.
Companies overhired for COVID,
Yeah.
and now the market is resetting. And I would say that that is probably over the last 4 years or so, that has been at least 50% of the layoffs, you know. And so the return to office mandates have been the people who they either couldn't find a reason to lay off because there are rules that you have to
Yeah.
follow, when you're doing a riff. you
Yeah.
you know you can't lay off everybody of one age group. You have to pick it over. And so this last bit is like, well, we've and I also believe layoffs happen in waves because it's transitory. What they do is you lay off a group of people, and then you rebalance the work and you figure out, do we still have too many people to do the amount of work that we need done and get the results that we're looking for, or at least adequate results for what we're looking for. And then you have the next wave of layoffs as they realize that they can consolidate a little more. And what we're seeing now with these return to office mandates is that final consolidation. I also think it is a penny pincher CFO thing, like we talked before. And companies have all these long-term leases on buildings, and they're like, we
Sitting there useless.
useless. Yeah, we need to have people come into these buildings and work. But the funny thing is it's not really helping. These return to office mandates, you have people who are, they come in and they clock in and they get a cup of coffee and they spend an hour, half hour or so at the office, and then claim they have to go to a meeting and then never come back.
Yeah.
And I mean, that's an old tactic because that's exactly what happened for the company. I'd go to the corporate headquarters in California, and the only people who were there all of the time were like HR, uh, the finance people who did expense reports, uh, almost everybody else, if they came in on a regular basis, they'd come in for an hour or two. Uh, and particularly since this was a Bay Area company, it wasn't like they were rolling in at 7 or 8 in the morning. They were rolling in at like 10,
Yeah.
and they'd stay in their office or their cubicle for an hour or two, go to lunch, and never come back. It wasn't that they weren't working or anything. And I'm talking about even senior executives.
Sure.
You know, they would just, I'm moving to a customer meeting, or I'm doing this or that. And so then they would take it as a remote meeting. Why do you need offices? In my opinion, what companies should be doing and what CFOs should be focusing on is, yes, we have this financial obligation for these long-term leases, but we need to notify everybody we're not going to keep this lease. And companies do have a obligation to have some facilities by law, typically at corporate headquarters and stuff. But all the satellite offices and stuff, nobody needs to have those. And if they do, and like in a major metropolitan area, they should be set up for conferences, for bringing customers in and doing that, and having very few full-time employees be there. If you have full-time employees, they should be like security and clerical.
No argument here.
You know, because just because you're attending the office, as a matter of fact, most of the time, if you're forcing people to commute in, you're getting less work out of them in the day.
Well, and not only that, but now you got travel time
Well, that's my point.
and all of that. Like it's
When does work? If you were on a time clock as a salaried employee, when does work start?
when it starts.
Correct. Correct. So if I'm a salaried employee, I'm saying work starts when I walk out the door.
Because I wouldn't be walking out the door unless I was working.
Correct.
Uh,
And so, if I have depending on the metropolitan you live in or whatever, if I have a 2-hour commute in via car and then train, and I leave the house at 8 a.m., but I don't get to the office at 10 a.m., I've still worked 2 hours. And, I will admit, when I've had to work on the East Coast, a lot of times we would take the train, like, and go all the way up the Eastern Seaboard from New York to DC. It's nice because you go into a car, you can use your cell phone, you can use Wi-Fi, you can work, uh, answer emails and do stuff that you would normally sit at a desk and do if you got to an office. Um, but in my case, I was going to customer meetings. I was specifically going to specific places. Why would I, do that to go into an office? And like my daughter, the company she worked for, a former GM subsidiary, um, everybody would come into the office because they had to come into the office every day and then get on Teams meetings in their offices.
to talk to the same people in the
There were all hands meetings
yeah.
that people would sit at their desks and dial into the Teams meeting, not go to the actual place,
Yeah.
in the same building.
Yeah. I would do that.
Yeah,
I would totally do that.
you know. And so
In fact,
so
I did do that. They had us come to DC to our big corporate building, and they had an all staff meeting, and I just stayed in my conference room and teamsed in, and yeah, there's no reason for me to go down there.
yeah, exactly. Well, and that's the thing, you now provide all these tools for this. Why do I need to be in the room? And because I worked for the technical sales organization at the previous big company I worked for, um, they would make us go to sales kickoff every year, and there were a couple years where they did it remotely. Those were my favorite years because I didn't have to travel. I didn't have to go and sit through hours and hours of meetings to hear,
Stuff that doesn't really apply to you.
or these sales kickoffs they're for the senior execs to say, hey, I did this and I did this. And
Yeah.
the reality of it is you did bullshit.
Yeah. He
You
did
didn't you
none of
didn't
that.
close the deal with Yahoo, and you didn't close the deal with Google, and you didn't close the deal with IBM.
And you didn't even bother to mention the guy that did.
Yeah. Yeah. And they want to go through, hey, we did 33% year over year growth. That's great for the company, but you could send me that in an email. Send me the PowerPoint deck as a PDF.
Yeah, I don't even want the PDF or the PowerPoint. Just
Yeah,
let me scroll through this.
exactly. Yeah,
Yeah.
okay, we did that. That's a good number to know. If customer asks, I now have that, you know.
Yeah.
But I didn't need to set through an hour and a half of you standing up there going through it and trying to get everybody to go rah rah sis boom bah.
Well, sales guys need that.
They don't. You think they do? Some sales guys do. But you know who the sales guys who need that are?
The ones that aren't very good.
Those and the ones who are former athletes, which there are a lot of former athletes who get into sales.
That's true.
I mean, I worked with a former Olympian, uh, and he's still in federal sales, and I worked with a former MLS soccer star. He started out in the Premier League in England, playing
Mm-hmm.
for one of the Premier League teams. And then he came in, and when they started Major League Soccer here in the United States, he played for several teams as a keeper. And those guys were the ones who liked the whole rah rah sis boom bah, type thing. But the guys who were like me, who are either technical oriented or coin operated or both, we were like, we could be doing other things.
I could be selling right now.
Exactly. I could be, make
ABC, always be
this be
closing.
closing. Exactly. Exactly. Well, um, the old rules of working for a living are being rewritten by data, surveys and reports and uh, actual numbers. And workers are voting with their feet or their follower counts. So we want to hear from you. Do you agree with what we said? Do you not agree with what we said? So send some feedback to GizmoSapiens@gmail.com. That's GizmoSapiens@gmail.com. Uh, or leave a post on our website, www.gizmosapiens.com, for episode 282. And we'll see you on the digital flip side.
You've been listening to Gizmo Sapiens, a technology and entertainment podcast. You can reach us at our email address at gizmosapiens@gmail.com. That's GizmoSapiens@gmail.com. We'd really love to hear from you, and we'll see you next week from the Digital Flipside.